Thank you for being here today. My name is Courtney Felton. I am the president and one of the founding members of Alabama Instructional Design Network, or AIDN, as we like to call it. With me today are Catherine Jarnigan, our vice president and also co-founder, and Dawn Dunaway, our events coordinator, and Rayanne Bailey, our marketing coordinator. And then we also have Crystal Butler, who couldn't be with us today. She is our treasurer, and Courtney Garza, who also couldn't be with us today, and she is our membership coordinator. So we are very glad that you're all here today and excited that you're all with us. And we're going to go ahead and get started, and we will let other people in as they come in. So we have a couple of things to go over with you just to remind you, if in case you have not seen this information yet before our presenter today, you can see that we have membership levels and dues now. So for the next year, our membership fees will all be the same for each level. You can see the requirements listed on the screen. There is a membership form that we will provide a link to as well, so that you can join in and participate in all of the things that we have coming up for you guys. Just a real quick plug, we do have merch now, and I am actually going to turn off my background so that you guys can see some of the merch we have available. And Rayanne also has one of our t-shirts on that you can see. Catherine has one of our short coffee mugs, and then I have this is the tall coffee mug. Catherine has one of the water jugs. I have a traveler mug. So a bunch of cool stuff, good quality. This is metal. Somebody was asking earlier. This is actually metal inside, so it's good quality stuff. If you want a sticker for the back of your car, these are what the stickers look like. Now, this is the small one if you're trying to decide what size to get. So if I compare it to here, this is the small size sticker. And there's also a medium and large one. There are discounts on our merch up until the end of summer series. So you can look in our chat. Dawn and Rayanne are putting links in there for you to our merch and to our membership forms and all of that good stuff. So make sure you check all of that stuff out. If you have any questions about anything, feel free to drop those in the chat. And we also have some links at the end of our slide deck today that will allow you to connect with us through social media if you are not connected there. So today, without further ado, we'll get into our presenter. So we're happy to have with us today Dr. Derrick Griffey. He is the Director of Distance Education, Faculty Development, and Learning Resources at Gadsden State Community College. So I am going to let him introduce himself and get into our presentation.
Thank you, Courtney. I'm honored that you guys let me come and speak to you today. I think that this is a great organization. I remember when Catherine had mentioned that this was something that was starting up. So I'm really pleased to be able to share with you guys today. What I'm going to do, I'm going to stop my video and then I'm going to share my presentation. What I'm going to be talking about today is a book that I've really liked for a long time. It's called Online Teaching at Its Best, Merging Instructional Design with Teaching and Learning Research. So I'm going to be kind of hitting on the high points from the book. So that's what my presentation is about. But just to tell you a little bit about me, so I am the Director of Distance Education, Faculty Development, and Learning Resources. And what that basically means is that if there's a job that somebody doesn't want to do at Gadsden State, then they just give it to me. And so I started out just as the director of our Teaching and Learning Center, and that sort of included faculty development. I'm also the LMS administrator. And I've been that. And then in 2018, 18, I inherited the library. So I'm also the library director, although I'm not a librarian by trade. So that's been a fun adventure. But my educational background there, you can see, I actually, I'm a big believer in what community colleges do and our mission and the people that we serve, because I consider myself a product of the community college system. And then my teaching fields are history and sociology. So I spent most of my time teaching social studies or history and sociology before coming into my current role in 2016. But just some other things about me: I own an antique store in historic downtown Attalla, Alabama. So if you've never been to Attalla, you need to come check it out. I also want to visit all 50 state capitol buildings. I have been to 30, and sort of that's where I've plateaued. I wanted to try to get all 30 before I turned 40, and I didn't make it. But it's basically the cold states that I still have to go to. I want to visit all the U.S. national parks. I've been to 17 of those. And then my hobbies include board games, video games, Star Trek memorabilia, and just general gadgetry. I love playing with all the latest and greatest toys that come out. So, but anyway, let me kind of introduce the book to you. So the cover that you see here is actually the new 2021 edition. They have updated it from the original edition, came out in 2018. And so they've updated it with some, I guess, lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, because I mean, that was a tremendous opportunity to learn about, online teaching and learning, and because you basically had a captive audience and everybody was doing it. So, historically, we've always thought about online learners as being a specific group of students, people who choose to take online classes. And then with the pandemic, everybody was taking online classes, whether they were suited for it or not, or whether they chose to do it or not. And so it really gave, I think, online educators an opportunity to reflect on, how can we do online teaching and learning better? And so what this book does and what makes it unique is that it takes sort of evidence-based or peer-reviewed practices for online teaching, online course design, and online student motivation, and kind of puts it all into one book. But what I think makes it even more useful, and the authors are Nilsson and Goodson, and so if you're interested in that, like I said, I'll share this PowerPoint and you can kind of go back and read about them. But what makes the book unique is that it is I guess the first or one of the few books that actually can combine the concepts of instructional design and then the scholarship of teaching and learning all in one book. I think conventional wisdom would think that scholarship of teaching and learning and then instructional design principles would go together and they would be from the same body of research, but they're not. And instructional designers are trained differently than teaching faculty. And of course, in a college and university setting, teaching faculty may not even have an educational background. I mean, if you think about a community college, we may have welding instructors or cosmetology instructors that came straight from industry. So they've never taught before at all. So there is a sort of a disconnect between what we see as instructional design research and then the scholarship of teaching and learning. And so this book is great because it combines the two. And then taking that a step further, it kind of helps faculty see the instructional designer's perspective. And then it also helps instructional designers see the faculty's perspective. In fact, at the end of each chapter, there's like this section where it goes through like reflections on, if you're an instructional designer, here are the things that you should think about. If you're a faculty member, here are the things that you should think about. And even if you're an administrator, here are the things that you should think about. So I have found the book to be really useful. And then even for new instructors, there is another book by Nilsson called Teaching at Its Best. And it sort of, if you've never taught before, it kind of goes through all of the stuff that you would need to know about teaching for the very first time. And it's a pretty useful research as well. So some of the design challenges, for online learning is, number one, we often forget that online learning creates additional cognitive burden. So what that means is that students, they're already stressed out because they might be taking this online class for the first time. They're having to orient themselves to the class. And so there's that part, but then they also have to worry about the content. So it's not only the worrying about, my chemistry class or my history class, it's also worrying about how to navigate and use the software and the technology and to submit the assignments and do all that stuff separate from the content. And so that creates a tremendous amount of cognitive burden for students. And what makes it even more difficult is that students, of course, don't have immediate access to their instructor. I mean, unless it's a synchronous class, but the vast majority of online classes are asynchronous. Students, of course, have to learn how to self-regulate their learning. So, I mean, they're, for the most part, are deadlines and pacing in online classes, but students still, there's an element of motivating themselves to do the work. And a lot of students are just not good at that. And then finally, students have a varying access to technology. And so like one of the things we saw here at Gadsden State is that we serve Etowah and Calhoun counties, which are, they're rural elements, but they're also pretty well populated. But we also serve Cherokee County, and there's elements of Cherokee County where internet access is almost non-existent. And so for the students who were taking on ground classes, when we transitioned to online, it made them getting their work done extremely difficult. And so, so those are kind of, I guess, the background of what you would get or what the advantage or the benefits to this particular book are. What I also like about it, because it is it's a scholarly text, she brings in, or the authors bring in, everything from quality matters to all of the various scholarly research, not only from the areas of instructional design, but also, sort of classic just learning theories and learning science. And so it's a really useful resource if you're not familiar with it. So the presentation today is going to be divided into two parts. Part one is best practices for organizing content, and then part two is best practices for creating activities and assignments. And then I'll, of course, give you guys an opportunity for questions as we move through. And if you do think of questions as I'm moving along, if you'll go ahead and type those in the chat, at the end, I will also go back and kind of look at the questions in the chat so that I can address any of those as we're moving along. But so the first, I guess you can say, best practice for designing an online class. Of course, everybody is pretty well familiar with the universal design for learning. So, UDL is a framework, of course, to optimize teaching and learning so that all students in the environment can access the information and the content equally. And so the idea here too is that you should provide multiple means of engagement in the class, multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression, and so on and so forth. And this website here, udlguidelines.cas.org, has a lot of great resources for incorporating UDL into your courses. And so the three aspects of this, just as a quick summary, are engagement, representation, and then action expression. And so, I like how this graphic structures it too, is the why of learning, the what of learning, and the how of learning. So, for motivated learners, we want to try to stimulate their interest and motivate them. For resourceful and knowledgeable learners, we want to present the information and content in different ways. And then for strategic and goal directed learners, we want to differentiate the ways that students can express what they know. And so from a design point of view, and kind of stepping into that faculty role, so stepping away from the instructional designer role, but if I were a teacher and designing a class that I have not taught, or I'm going to be teaching for the first time, even in an online course, I like the questions that are presented here because, if I'm teaching a world history class, why am I teaching that? Why do my students have to take it? And I think that's a valuable question for an instructor to ask themselves, because, if I have a student who's majoring in, engineering, and they take World History 1 and World History 2, they don't often see the connection or the why of that course. And to create engagement in a class, students really need to see that relevance of the content. And so, like, an example of this might be, if I have engineering students, let's talk about ancient engineering. Let's talk about the aqueducts of Rome. Let's talk about those kinds of projects. And, in a perfect world, it would be great to design a history class or, a general ed class designed around the majors, collectively within the course. And of course, we can't do that because we often don't know everybody in the class. But one of the strategies that you get from this book is do a survey with your students, find out what majors you have in the class, and it might help you structure some activities that will create engagement. And another question I'll ask myself is the what of learning. So when I'm presenting the information, so I know now why students need to take history. So what about history am I going to present? Because world history is, like, we're trying to pack thousands of years into 2 classes. So, what am I going to present? And that's really difficult in world history, more so than American history, actually. But anyway, you don't want to just, of course, put in a textbook and, have students just read the text. You want to present that information in a variety of ways. And the thing about online learning is that there are numerous tools out there on the web that can help you design content to present that information in a wide variety of ways. It's just the biggest problem that I think faculty have here is that it's time consuming. And so what we end up doing is seeing, faculty, especially institutions that don't have instructional designers, we see them leaning on textbook content and leaning on, those activities because they're already designed, they're already done. And, it does make life a little bit easier, but, if you want to do it right, as the instructor, you should go through all that content and pare it down and be very specific and very intentional about what you present to the students. But the last part is the how of learning. So how am I going to differentiate the ways that students can tell me that they learned something? So, now I know why I'm teaching history. Now I know what parts of the history I'm going to teach, but then now, how am I going to vary up the different ways that students can demonstrate to me that they learned what I want them to learn? And again, I think faculty often in an online class, if they've not done it very long, they might do multiple choice quizzes or whatever. But realistically, there's a lot of ways for students to demonstrate learning. To kind of give you a very specific example of this, when I redesigned the world history class, one of the things that I did was in every single module, they had a quiz, but then they also had an assignment, and the assignments always varied. They were always different. It might be a worksheet, it might be an additional discussion, it might be a reflective activity. But one of the things that I had them do is they had to create a 5-slide PowerPoint presentation and turn that in. I mean, pretty simple. I gave them specific instructions of what I was looking for in the PowerPoint presentation, but that's what they had to do for that particular assignment in that module. And what I found is that when I surveyed the students at the end of the class, several students said that they liked the ability to be creative with the PowerPoint. And that really made me think that I really need to spend time thinking about, students who want to express themselves in more creative ways, or students who want to express themselves in writing, or students who want to express themselves in a very sequential, sort of, I just want to click the buttons and move on about my life, all of those students deserve an opportunity to express their learning in a way that I think that works for them. Now, if you go out to the Universal Design for Learning website, there's a lot of different frameworks that you can look at, and I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with that one, but Nielsen and Goodson really depend on, or they do spend quite a bit of time talking about UDL and its importance in creating classes that everyone can succeed in.
Hey, Derrick.
Yes.
Before you move on from UDL, do you mind if I make just a quick comment, a couple of comments?
Yeah, absolutely.
So one, I think universal design is really, really important to instructional design. So I'm interested to know from people who are with us today, participants, if you're familiar with UDL, if you would like to learn more about UDL. I think that's a great opportunity for us to present more information about this. But just to make a couple of comments about relevance, especially in representation, the first two principles that you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
I think relevance, especially when you're dealing with undergraduate students, younger students, adding information about how things are relevant to the student's personal life can also be really effective. So to your point about, designing history, connecting it to current events or showing how things that happened in world history are similar to how things happen now, and creating that relevance, I think, can also be really important. The more that you connect it to their personal life and personal experience, the more that can engage learners. And then for adult learners, connecting it to how they'll apply that to their career, or how they can apply that to their career, I think is very important. And just to talk about representation real quick, when we're talking about that, I think it's important to also mention that having students see their culture represented is also very important when we're talking about representing multiple ways of representing. So like you mentioned, like it shows here on this graphic, making sure that there are cultural examples that are from multiple different cultures, providing additional resources. So when you're teaching science, to have scientists that are from different cultures and things like that, so that learners can see themselves. And it, I think, is also an important part of universal design for learning. I just wanted to mention those and throw those out there real quick, because I think they're important for people who don't know a lot about UDL to include in their information.
I totally agree with that. And UDL is something that realistically we could spend the whole 45 minutes to an hour talking about UDL and how to apply that in a class. And that's why, I wish, like I said, it's hard because there's so much to it. It's hard to talk about it in a short amount of time. But like I said, in the online teaching at its best, they do spend a significant amount of time applying UDL to course design. And I agree with you too, that, relevance, you can try to convey relevance in a variety of ways: personal life, career. You just want students to connect to the content in some way so that they do see it as relevant, rather than, I'm just reading a textbook and taking a quiz and it doesn't really, apply to what I want to do with myself, or, because it's, there are some courses that are more difficult than others to deliver that, relevance. And world history can be challenging, in terms of what I've experienced in the past. But it has been interesting, though, and I think it's fulfilling when a student is able to make that connection, where they see the relevance of something that you're talking about in world history. In world history too, religion is a big thing too. So if you can talk about religion, like if you've got, like, let's say, a Muslim student, and when you talk about the development of Islam, that's something that they can connect to as well. So you're absolutely right. And there's a slide that I'm coming up on in a little bit about inclusivity. And so we'll kind of revisit that in just a little bit. But the next thing that Nielsen and Goodson talk about are the 3 C's of online course design. Now, this is their 3 C's. What I have found is that if you do research on 3 C's of online course design, you'll find a lot of different C's. So there's really probably a whole bunch of C's that you can bring in here. But for the purposes of today's discussion, I'm going to focus on these 3 C's that Goodson and Nielsen bring out in the text, and it's consistency, clarity, and communication. And the whole point of this is to try to eliminate the cognitive burden involved in online learning. So the idea is that we want students, when they begin an online class, we want students to just have to worry about the content, worry about the learning objectives, and not have to worry about the aspect of online learning itself, navigating the course, figuring out where things are, how to turn in assignments, and those types of things, which can be very challenging, especially for students that haven't really done online learning, or when we talk about non-traditional students that, maybe right now, for example, we have students from where the Goodyear plant shut down. And so some of these folks are in their, early 50s, early 60s in some cases. And, I encountered a student who's in our carpentry program, and Blackboard and online learning, and really computers in general, is a whole new adventure for this student. And so you can imagine, in a world where COVID is happening and everything's online, that can be incredibly stressful for students like that. And so by focusing on consistency, clarity, and communication, you can reduce some of that cognitive burden in online learning. So this is a graphic that I actually created to kind of, summarize some of the things that I'm going to talk about, but we'll kind of go through these. So number 1, the first C is consistency in design. And this is something I have found that is easy to convey to faculty when they're working on an online class, is to tell them to make sure that whatever they do, to try to stay consistent as they move through the course. And so whether you're structuring your course in modules or weeks or folders or whatever you're doing to put your course together, you want to stay consistent for each topic, each week, each module. And once you've developed that in a consistent manner, then you want to make sure that you develop an orientation so that students, begin the course on the right foot. So you can make that, you can do a video, you can, type out instructions, really doing both, because, some students may prefer to read how to look at the course, or maybe they like screenshots versus watching a video or whatever. The next thing, is if your institution, a lot of institutions have a required or a recommended course structure. That's really good, because as an institution, if all students or if all courses are structured in the same way throughout the institution, then that helps students just kind of know that, okay, I'm going to click here to begin the class. This is where all of my course content's located, and so on and so forth. And learning management systems have even really changed to try to enforce this as well. So like, for example, Blackboard Ultra is, faculty or course builders have less options in terms of how the course is built and organized. And so they've really pared it down so that it almost forces the course to be consistent. And certainly the visual aspect of the course in Ultra, it looks the same in every single course, where in the original Blackboard experience, there is some variability there. You want to try to create a learning cycle where students know what to expect for each topic. So in other words, you get them in a habit. Once you do that first module, if every single module works the same way, then students just sort of know what they have to do, and it becomes a habit for them. Organize the topics in the order of coverage is what the book says, but to expand on that, is it not just coverage, but organize your content in a manner that makes sense. Like make sure that as you're putting the content together, organize it in a way that it's not like, jerking from one topic to another. And then the last thing, of course, is, make your frequently used resources easy to find. So maybe like in my course, for example, there is an OER textbook that they use. So that link is available pretty much 1,000 times all over the course. So they don't have to click around looking for it. But these are, just a few examples of how you can create consistency in a class. Some examples, some sort of concrete examples of creating this consistency is, of course, structuring each module in the exact same way. So, beginning it with an overview of the week or overview of topics. Make sure you put your learning objectives, remind your students for the week, whatever information that they might need. If there's a test coming up, or maybe the college is going to be closed for a holiday or whatever. And then, weekly course materials and activities. So like, give them a preview of what's to come in the next week. And you can do this at the beginning of your module. You can do it in your announcements, but just whatever you decide to do in terms of delivering that information, you want to be consistent with it. So if you start with it being an announcement, do that same announcement every single week at the same time, the same day, so on and so forth. And most learning management systems let you create the announcement, and then you can schedule it for when it's supposed to come out, so that students just know when they log in at 8 o'clock on Monday morning, they're going to have that announcement from you. Then within the module, design a consistent presentation of materials. So like in this example, it says, the things you read, the things you watch, and then the things you do, or your activities. That's a really good way to do it. So, every week it's read, watch, do, read, watch, do, so that they get into the habit and they just sort of know how it's structured. To give you an example from my own class, so this is an example from my world history class. And this is the very first module that they come to. And the reason why I call it module 0 is this is really just sort of course housekeeping, where I really, in this module, try to help them understand why world history is a useful class for them. So, I give a module introduction, I have my learning objectives, and of course, they're aligned with the ACCS objectives, which is the Alabama Community College System objectives. So I try to kind of map them out so that all of them demonstrate alignment. And then I put in a table of contents. And so the items, so it's module 0. So 0 period 1 is, module 0 thing 1. And then I number them that way. And so all of the things through all of my modules are numbered the same exact way. And then I kind of structure it by what I call action. So, if it's in bold, it's something they have to do. So complete, discuss, or whatever. And then, reading activities, watching videos, and then of course, continue is the link to the next module and an introduction there. And then I provide a due date and talk about, when things are due, and so on and so forth. And so every single one of my modules in the class are designed this exact same way, just so that I can deliver that consistency. Now, I will say my table of contents, the column to the right is cut off a little bit, but I also, if there's a point value involved, I let the students know how many points are involved there as well. But another example from a language course. So this is one that I have seen or I saw online, but this class, theirs is much more simple, but it's still effective, giving you that overview, your learning objectives, and then the activities and assignments that go along with it. However you decide to do it, though, you want to make sure that you stay consistent. Now, the second C is clarity of expectations. And so the big thing that Goodson and Nielsen talk about here is the concept of scaffolding. So basically what scaffolding is the instructions being clear so that students kind of know what to do next and then what to do next. And then those instructions and activities and things build on one another. Like if you think about scaffolding in a building or whatever. Because if you don't provide clear expectations and clear instructions or clear outcomes, what you'll find is that, students will start struggling and then asking a lot of questions. And so the more clarity you can put into your instructions, into the way you design a course up front, reduces the number of questions that you have to answer later. So here's a little graphic that I kind of think shows the thing. So the little puzzle piece at the top of the column there is the learning outcome. And so you want to create instructions and activities that guide the student to to achieving that objective. And then on the other side, you kind of give them an assessment. You figure out if they give them an opportunity to demonstrate if they learned what you wanted them to learn. But there's different ways to do scaffolding. Number one is procedural. So you can break your tasks into smaller parts, and then do it to where students can sort of organize their time more effectively. So maybe you do it to where they only have to spend 15 minutes at a time if you want to do it that way. So that's one way to look at it. You could also be task or assignment specific. So, you could provide rubrics or examples of successful activities so that students know what's expected in order for them to be successful. And then, of course, there's also conceptual, where you help students organize or connect concepts and skills, linking to previous knowledge, opportunities for students to discuss or reflect on assignments. And what you may end up doing is doing a combination of all three of those, depending on what you're teaching or the type of class that you have. But the main thing is that you guide students to the learning outcome or achieving the learning outcome. And so you want to provide plenty of opportunities. You want to think about designing the activities, which we'll talk about in a minute, so that they explicitly help the student achieve that learning objective, and so on and so forth. Of course, the last thing is communication. And I sort of think this one is obvious, but it's, it's still something that I think faculty really have to think about. And they need to be very clear about their expectations. For those of you that are familiar with Quality Matters, one of the things that you learn in Quality Matters training, or as you're learning to apply the rubric to your courses, Quality Matters really likes to see a communication plan, how you're going to communicate with your students, almost, to a policy, to where, this is how I'm going to communicate with you. This is my expected form of communication, and so on and so forth. I think a lot of faculty members think if they throw an email address out there that students would get the idea, well, I want you to communicate with me through email. And, unfortunately, students don't necessarily get that. They don't think about email the same way that we do. So they need you to tell them, this is what I want you to do to communicate with me. And then once you establish that plan, or whatever you're going to do for communication, you need to stick to it. If you say that, I want you to message me inside the LMS, I will respond to your messages within 24 hours. Well, you need to stick to that. And if for some reason, let's say you're going to go on vacation, or you're going to go out of town for the weekend, and you're not going to be checking your messages, it's a good idea to let your students know, hey, I'm going to go out of town. I won't be checking messages from this date to this date, because, a student may message you, and if they don't hear from you in the time that you say that you're supposed to respond, students start to panic. And another thing that consistent communication does is it creates a presence in the course. So students know that you're actively in the course with them. Because if you're not responding to messages, or you're not grading, in a reasonable amount of time, then students realize that you're not there, that you're not in the room with them. And so that presence is really important for students to feel secure, and it reduces a lot of anxiety for students as well. Now, some of the recommendations that come from the book is it says, use the announcement features regularly for course info, and, just an overall, introduction to the week. Hey guys, this is what we're going to be doing this week. This is when everything's due. I hope you have a great week. Using that announcement feature is a good way to communicate to the whole class about something that's going on or whatever. Another thing that Nielsen and Goodson talk about here too is this is an opportunity for you to let your students get to know you. So if you've got sort of a goofy sense of humor, and you want to deliver memes, that the announcements is a great way to do that. That's why it says occasional lighter things. Here at Gadsden State, Dawn, and then one of our colleagues, Farrah Hayes, which you guys may get a presentation from her at some point. They love Bitmoji. I mean, they use Bitmoji constantly. And I mean, I like Bitmoji. I just haven't been as prolific as incorporating my Bitmoji into my lessons, but that's probably something I should do. But it's a great way for you to let your students see your personality and that you are a real person and that you're not just some, random person on the other end of a thing. Now, they talk about using both email and the LMS for communication. And this is something that, I kind of struggle with because, if students message in Blackboard, the message, of course, the advantage is they stay in Blackboard, they stay with the course, they're archived with the course so that communication is always there. But the problem with it is it's not as easy to respond to those as it is to do email. If a student emails me, I can respond from my phone. But if they message me in Blackboard, I have to actively go into Blackboard and check it. And so this is something that I personally have been trying to experiment with different ways of doing it. Right now, I'm experimenting with a form generator where students click on a link within the course, and then they type in the, whatever their question is or whatever their email is. And what that does is it automatically generates a receipt for them, but then it also sends it to my email. And so I can actually just respond just like I would an email. And of course, then their responses end up in their their official student email. So I guess an advantage to that is that it sort of conditions them to be checking their student email. But that's an area of something that I think communication in online classes is not only critical, it's also something that I think, like we're still trying to figure out the best way of doing that. And I don't know that we've quite gotten there. I noticed that one of the piece of research that I was looking at encourages faculty to use some third-party communication tool like Slack or something like that. And I can see some advantages to that as well. But in any case, whatever communication form you decide to use, you need to be consistent about it and you need to stick to it. Also, interaction is very important in online class. So not only do you want that communication, sort of the one-way communication of the instructor creating an announcement or something like that, but you also want it to be two ways. You want students to be able to communicate with you as well, and for them to express how things are going with them in the class, or how they're learning, or what they're learning. The interaction in an online class is just absolutely important. And the most common way we do that is through discussion boards. But now there are some tools, I think, out there now that sort of take this interaction and do some more fun things with it. And of course, we're seeing more and more with gamification. So, if you're bored with discussion boards, there may be some things coming down the way. But what's really important, though, about interaction, of course, too, is that in a lecture class, you can interact with students just by being there. Having a conversation with them. It's very easy. But in an online class, you have to really plan when the interactions are going to take place. Even if it's going to be a synchronous interaction, you still have to plan when you're going to have that Zoom session or when you're going to have that Blackboard Collaborate session. So you want to make sure that you're very strategic about when you plan the interactions, and you want to try to do it so that it accommodates the most students. There's also principles of good practice for high quality interaction online. And since I'm going to share this PowerPoint with you, I will leave you to kind of go back and review this on your own, because I see that it's 12:48, so I don't want to go over too much. But anyway, these are the things that, generally speaking, or at least according to the research, create a good quality interaction experience in an online class. Another thing that I find that faculty really struggle with this one, but it's the student-to-student interaction. And you really want to try to encourage this as well, because, think about it, in a lecture class, students are not only interacting with the teacher, but they're interacting with each other. And so one thing that you want to try to consider with your discussion forums is really trying to encourage the students to communicate with one another. And most of the time, what we do is we say, well, you need to make an initial post and then, however many posts to your classmates. And of course, the problem with that is it's always sort of artificial. It's very difficult for it to be sort of natural. And so you really want to try to create, when you do a discussion forum, try to come up with a way or a prompt or whatever that's going to engage students not only with the content, but also it would have them want to engage with each other. I really hate politics right now in a learning environment for a variety of reasons. But, that's always something that creates a lively debate in a class. But, the way that you write, how they respond to that discussion forum it really depends on how interactive that they decide to get within the discussion forum. I find that here at Gadsden State, our ethics classes always probably have the most lively discussions, because the questions or the discussion topics are topics that people just like to talk about and they have an opinion about. Unfortunately, I can't necessarily say that for world history, but in any case, some more specific good practice for discussion. So, be detailed about your instructions. So if you're connecting the discussion to a grade, be very intentional about how you give them instructions and let them know how you're going to grade their discussions. Be present to guide the discussion. So students really want to see that not only that you're grading the discussions, but that you're actually in the discussion forum as well. And I'm guilty a lot of times of, when I grade discussions, I provide feedback when I go through and do the grading, but I really need to spend more time actually engaging with the students in the discussion forum, because that generally makes the discussions a little bit more meaningful. Require students connect to the content and the concept. So again, when you design whatever you want to do for your discussion, you want to make sure that students are connecting to the content that they're learning in that module. And then the topic should be unique and relevant to the assignment. So you don't want to do the same discussion question every single week. You want to make them unique. You want to make them, because if they answer it the same way every week, they tend to get lazy by the end of the class. So if you keep them unique and you kind of structure the discussions in a way that makes them think, it's successful. One of the best discussion questions I ever put in world history is asking, you pick a historical character, let's just say Julius Caesar, and then you have them make the argument, is he a hero or a villain? And students seem to really like that, because there are arguments to be made that he was a villain, dictator kind of character, but then he was also a hero. So having students having to depend on the content to figure out their opinion on, his character has been really useful in a lot of cases. Then inclusivity in course design is the last thing that I was going to mention. And this kind of goes back to what we talked about a moment ago in the UDL. When you're trying to make the content relevant to the students, you can do that by connecting it to their career, connecting it to their major, but again, connecting it to their personal life as well can be very important. And so some things that you can do to increase inclusivity in your course design is consider pronouns, promote confidence to the students, let them see you as a person, kind of connect to them, make your rubrics very detailed so that there's lots of, it answers all of their questions, serve as a role model, especially if you're going to be participating in those discussion forums, ensure equal access, that everybody can get to the content in the same way, avoid unwanted focus, kind of stick, keep it to the point, don't chase rabbits kind of thing. And so this is a really great little summary things to do that you can do to make your class more inclusive. So for the last few minutes of my presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about best practices for activity design, because I want you guys to have an opportunity to ask questions. But when you're planning activities, one of the things that online teaching at its best really stresses is make sure you have your outcomes first. You want to start with the learning outcome, write your outcomes so that they're very clear, they're very explicit. Students know exactly what they're supposed to learn when they finish the module, or when they finish the activity, or when they finish whatever it is that you want them to do. Start there, because what I find that a lot of faculty will do, especially if they're doing like a course redesign, is that they'll take activities and they'll take content, of course, that they've been using, and then try to, write objectives that fit that activity or that content. And the problem with that is, you're not taking time to think about what you want students to learn. You're letting the activities and the content drive what your expectations are in the course. And that's kind of the opposite of what you should be doing. You should be thinking about, what do you want students to learn? What do you need students to learn by the time that they finish the class? And then from there, develop the activities and the content and the things that go with it. So start with your learning, your outcomes first. Then, as you're writing your learning objectives, you want to make sure that you're using, action verbs, which basically make the objective measurable. Is it a way that that if the student does this, that they learn what you wanted them to learn? So it's a way for you to know that they're actually succeeding in getting what you want them to get from the class. And Bloom's taxonomy is the most common place that you can go in the Bloom's revised taxonomy to get, action verbs for creating good learning outcomes. But there's a variety of other ones there too that you can access. Now, course activities must align with the activities must align with the objectives. And of course, if you've done Quality Matters, Quality Matters really puts a lot of emphasis on alignment, but there is value here. So when you create your learning objectives, you want to think about, are they measurable? Are they necessary? In other words, is this something that students need to do in order to be successful in the class? Then think about, how does your assignments help learners achieve those outcomes? So, if you say, I want students to, or students should learn this when they finish the class, does your assignments actually guide them to achieving that objective? And that's something that you should really think about. And then mapping your activities to the objective. So show how the activities correspond to the objective, and how once the student does the activity, how that helps them achieve that objective. And that helps them see relevance not only in the content, but also in the, what they're having to do. And they don't think of it as busy work. So this is a couple little graphics that I have, but on the right here, so the intended learning objective or outcome is students will be able to put together an IKEA Billy bookcase. The teaching and learning activity is, in the classroom, students took apart Billy bookcases and practiced putting them together again. And then the assessment is, students are assessed on their ability to put together a Billy bookcase. And so what this basically shows you is the intended learning outcome is they have to put together a bookcase. Well, the activity had them practicing putting together bookcases. So, when they're able to then put together the bookcase on their own, we know that they learned what they were supposed to learn. And I know this is a very generic example, but that's the way that we should really approach learning outcomes, and then, of course, teaching and learning activities. And the last thing here is, sort of best practices for activities in general. They should be relevant. Students should never think of it as busy work. They should be, of course, organized in a logical manner and a consistent manner. Free from, extraneous content. So, make sure that your activities are to the point. Students get from it what they need to get from it. Design activities with learners with ways to apply or see the relevance of the content, which we kind of talked about that already. design activities that allow students to choose from different ways to demonstrate knowledge. And so that's what I was talking about a minute ago. You know, one way that you could think about doing this is if you want students to, let's say you provide them with a discussion or an essay question, and you say, you can answer this question by making a video, by creating a PowerPoint presentation, or by doing an online, website or something similar. You know, sometimes students like options in terms of ways to express learning. And I know that's difficult for teachers to do sometimes, but you know, it's not so difficult if you are very, sort of targeted. So like on this activity, you know, like you can turn it in as a paper, you can turn it in as a video, and kind of stick to it. And that also helps you too, because then you create your rubric for the students who create a paper and the students who create the video, with the rubrics sort of complementing one another depending on the format that the student decides to turn it in. But some ways that you can, think about this is, in terms of just learning activities, not necessarily assessments, but, students can read stuff, watch videos, listen to podcasts, explore teacher curated resources. So like if you put together, almost like a scavenger hunt inside the LMS, there's a lot of ways to do that. And what we're really seeing right now is that there's a real proliferation of content, or I should say content creators out there, so that online classes can just be that much more enriching. So the recap, we were talking about online teaching at its best, the book, and we talked about universal course design, the 3 C's to avoid cognitive burden, inclusivity and online course design, and then best practices for activity design, outcomes, action verbs, and making sure that it's aligned so that students can be successful. So now then, we'll take some questions. My email address is dgriffey@gadsdenstate.edu, and I'll type that in the chat. And then also I'll make my presentation so that it can be shared, so that you guys can have access to it. But I'll turn my video back on and kind of stop the share so that I can see the folks asking questions.
Thank you for that. That's a ton of information. That's great information, especially for people who are new to instructional design. That sounds like that's a great book and a great resource for people who want to delve more into those topics. Dawn put a comment in the chat about the Learning Objectives Generator website. Do you want to mention that real quick?
Yeah, Dawn, do you want to talk about that for a moment?
Sure, Derek. This is the website that you showed me about. That is a website that generates.
That's right.
Learning objectives. Let me just share it real quick because it's really cool. It's something that you can share with your faculty if they're new to learning objective writing. That quickly and easily allows them to put together a learning objective based on Bloom's taxonomy. So who's the learner, student, or learner? Then you click next. So then here we have remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating. We just pick one, duplicate. And then you put in the task the learner has to do. And you just, I'm going to type in some gibberish.
What if we use the create the bookcase that Derek used earlier?
So anyway, it begins to just put it together for them. But one of the things I really like is that second step, which is the what. And this can make it clearer for faculty who's new to learning objective writing, to just give them a flow where they can just plug it in and create the learning objective.
And something like this is really useful too for faculty members that are maybe new to teaching. So like if you may have a faculty member who's fresh out of graduate school, or maybe someone who came from business or industry, something like this that helps them, sort of puts their objectives together for them is really useful, because they might not know necessarily. And there's lots of bad examples of learning objectives that you see sometimes out there. If you've done Quality Matters and then you see a learning objective that just says students will understand blah, 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 you just think that's not measurable. That's not measurable. But anyway, I put the link here for those. I saw someone said that they wanted to know more about universal UDL design learning. Anyway, here's the UDL website. I put that in the chat if you guys want to check that out.
Awesome. Well, we are over time, and I don't see any questions in the chat, so we'll go ahead and close things out. I am going to share just a little bit of information before we go. So our last session is going to be our secretary, Sarah. She's going to present about backward design, going from big ideas to small. And Sarah works for an organization that is not a higher ed organization. So if you have somebody who is in the nonprofit or corporate side, this would be an interesting presentation for you to see things from a different perspective. I know I'm very interested in this because I've just transitioned from higher ed to corporate. And so I'm interested to hear about Sarah's experience. So if that's something you're interested in, or if you just want to know about backwards design, then we hope that you will join us next week. Don't forget that our merch is available at a discounted price right now and will be until the end of next week, the end of our summer series. And that information was added to the chat earlier, so you can see those links. And then we do have a YouTube channel, and we will post this on our YouTube channel for people who are not able to join us today. We have a Twitter, we have a website, we have an Instagram, we have a Facebook. Rayanne has been posting a lot of information to those sites. So if you have not connected with us on our social media platforms, I encourage you to do so, because those we have been able to pick up activity on those sites. So if there aren't any other questions or comments, then we'll say thank you for joining us, and we will see you again next week.
And thank you for having me. And I posted a link to my presentation in the chat.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time and for that great information.